Star Wars just explained part of Rey's vision from way back during The Force Awakens. We'll talk about all that as we dive a bit deeper into the Knights of Ren on today's video. Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome. Thanks so much for joining me on another upload. Hope you're having a wonderful day. So, as you may be aware, earlier this year, the Legacy of Vader comic run started, and I typically don't talk about Star Wars comics for reasons I've described in the past, specifically regarding their use of stolen fan art, but this one has been pretty interesting. It's written by Charles Soule, who I'm sure most of you know from his Vader comics or his work within various Star Wars canon projects, and the comic tells the story of Kylo Ren, especially during the time between episode 8 and 9. We're 8 issues in, and the most recent release, which came out a couple of days ago, had some revelations and, as I alluded to in the introduction, also cleared up a scene that we first saw back in 2015 in The Rise of Skywalker. For those who don't remember, when Rey touches the Skywalker saber at Maz Kanata's, she sees several evocative flashing scenes, including Kylo stabbing a man wielding a weapon with a distinctive hat. I always liked this scene and implied a lot about Kylo Ren's sort of dark past, and in my opinion, the revelations both in this comic and outside of it have not lived up to that. The Knights of Ren, for example, ended up mostly just being like marauders, kind of a roving gang, which I didn't find very interesting. I would have rather them to be more tied closely to the Sith or some esoteric arm of the First Order. I really don't like the character of Ren, who looks a lot like Jeffrey Epstein, but let's pick up from the comic. We'll get back to that. So the issue starts off with us being introduced to the newest leader of the Knights of Ren, Hava. We really don't know much about her. She's clearly Force sensitive, she's brash, and even more of a risk taker than the other members of the group, who themselves live a violent nomadic lifestyle. She's fully taken over the Knights of Ren, who are off on their own, and this is one aspect of the group I really don't like very much. Basically, when Kylo joins the First Order, the Knights sort of just go on their way. It's a bit weird then that Kylo maintains the Ren moniker, or that in episode 7 Snoke refers to the Knights of Ren as he does, with Kylo being the leader of them. It's just strange. I don't like the way they've handled that lore at all. Anyway, they give us a bit of a backstory of Kylo's time with the group, how he joined up as Ben, became Kylo quickly. We see the armor he's wearing in episode 7. He had that while touring the galaxy with this group. Also don't like that. I prefer it to be some sort of explicitly Sith or dark side armor. Apparently he was too edgy for the group, and eventually they ended up taking on assassination missions. On one specifically, they have to target what's described as an inner rim warlord, and we see the scene where Kylo stabs through the chest the individual from that vision, who seems to be the warlord himself. So the scene we have here bears no real bearing to Rey's destiny or even really Kylo's. It was kind of just another mission he went on. It does seem like this may have been one of the final things that happened before he left the Knights of Ren, however, and went on with Snoke full time. We know that Kylo and Snoke had been in communication. At that point, however, Snoke drew Kylo away from the Knights of Ren and directly into the First Order. And like, this panel itself just really explains why I don't love the direction they've taken with these characters. After he gets turned to the First Order, Kylo asks whether he should kill the Knights of Ren, and this mysterious group we saw cool flashes of in The Force Awakens has the following dialogue. What? What are you talking about? We're loyal. You're the Ren. We're your guys. Anyway, Kylo would not be turned against them. Instead, they'd be attacked by the First Order and would retreat. We get a shot of the Supremacy Mega Star Destroyer, which honestly, we almost never see. Anyway, the comic ends with the First Order discussing the Corellian shipyards when, guess who? The Knights of Ren show up and request a meeting. Their top Tava, the new leader of the Knights of Ren, introduces herself and pledges their services to Kylo. Obviously, this is just a ruse. The Knights of Ren are in a weird spot where usually the leader would have to kill the prior leader, and Kylo still technically holds that mantle despite having no interest in the organization, so she sees her job as eliminating him and taking the reins formally. Obviously, she's not going to be able to do that. Kylo is exceptionally powerful, and instead I think we'll get the story of how he reincorporated the Knights of Ren into his position of leader of the First Order. It's also a bit weird to me because Tava doesn't seem to have any real problems controlling the Knights of Ren. Like, yeah, they don't go along with her plan at the beginning and they retreat, but that's not because they don't respect her authority, really. It's because she's going to get them killed, and I don't think that will change even if she did manage to defeat Kylo. Anyway, that's all for this video. I will just end on a couple things. First of all, you guys don't watch the battle breakdowns anymore. You ask for them, you beg for them. I did a new one yesterday. I even updated the visuals to make it look cool, and no one watched it. Go check it out. All right, we also have a hashtag Ask Ek question from Dan the YouTube Addict, who says, when does the period called the Old Republic end and it becomes just the Republic? Interesting question, and if you want to learn more about this era, please check out the video I put out a couple of days ago on the pre-Clone Wars era Republic military, but this all goes back to George Lucas really being unsure about how old he wanted the Republic to be. Of course, in the original Star Wars, Obi-Wan explains that for 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. You know, 1,000 generations is obviously tens of thousands of years. On other occasions, however, George Lucas has said that the Republic was 1,000 years old. So the way the expanded universe and mostly canon has handled it is that 1,000 years before the Star Wars prequels, there's an event called the Ruusan Reformation. At that point, the Sith disappeared, the Republic reorganized its military and really changed how they govern the galaxy, and it was at that point, really, that the switch flipped and you could call them the Republic, I guess. It was mostly a period of peace where, of course, the 25,000 years earlier or more, the Republic, you know, it kind of just feels more like a timeless thing, but the period before would have had long periods of peace and long periods of conflict. Really, you can think about it like how we say we're in the modern era right now. If you describe everything outside of the modern era as pre-modern era, sure, that's one way to group things, like you could group the Old Republic, but in there, you could also find more discrete eras. Just like how some people would break the modern era up into different sub-eras or even post-modernity. Obviously, things get a little more complex in Star Wars canon with the High Republic, but I would still consider the High Republic sort of to be one of those slices of the Republic era. Anyway, those are my thoughts. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.